Rogue One, A Star Wars Story is certainly one of the better films in the Disney Star Wars era. It received positive reviews, grossed over $1 billion, and even spawned a successful spin-off show on Disney+. However, the production of the film wasn't all smooth sailing, with rewrites, reshoots, and new creative voices reshaping a film that was nearly completed. So today, I want to explore the history behind Rogue One. We'll trace it back from its development, to its rocky production, to its reception and legacy. Similar to the history behind Solo: A Star Wars Story, the history of Rogue One: A Star Wars Story can be traced back to an abandoned project known as Star Wars Underworld, a canceled TV show that first arose in 2005 and officially went into development in 2009. This show would have been set between the prequel and original trilogies, and would have had a darker and grittier tone, more in line with film noir. Around 50 episode scripts were written that covered tons of ideas and characters, such as Boba Fett, Palpatine, Han Solo, and brand new characters. During the development of the show, the visual effects supervisor for the prequel films, John Knoll, wrote a treatment for an episode known as Destroyer of Worlds. He thought a Mission Impossible style tale with a group of rebels stealing the Death Star plans would make a great episode. However, this show never got off the ground, and all these ideas were put on hold. But Knoll kept this idea in his back pocket, and when Disney bought Lucasfilm in 2012, Knoll would pitch this idea again, this time as a standalone feature-length film. Of course, Disney loved the idea and greenlit the project. Soon after, the ball began rolling, as in 2014, Gareth Edwards was attached to direct the film, who up to this point was probably most well known for directing 2014's Godzilla. A screenwriter was found with After Earth co-writer Gary Whitta, who would write the first draft before leaving a year later. He would be replaced with Chris Weitz, who you may know from The Golden Compass, About a Boy, or The Nutty Professor 2, The Clumps. More screenwriters would contribute to the script at various stages, but would not end up with writing credits, such as Christopher McQuarrie, Scott Z. Burns, and Michael Arndt. An early draft of the script had many characters survive the battle on Scarif, since Edwards assumed Disney wouldn't allow for a dark ending where everyone died. However, the producers opted for the more tragic ending, since it made more sense for the story. Originally, Solo was supposed to be the first Star Wars spin-off film after The Force Awakens, but since the script for Rogue One was completed first, it was pushed ahead and was the first official Star Wars spin-off. And in early 2015, the release date of December 16th of 2016 was officially set. The title Rogue One was also revealed, but no plot details were announced, so many fans began to speculate on what the movie might entail. Casting also went underway in early 2015. Frontrunners for the lead of Jyn Erso included Tatiana Maslany, Kate Mara, and Rooney Mara, but it ended up with Felicity Jones. Aaron Paul, Edgar Ramirez, and Sam Claflin were all eyed for the role of Cassian Andor. However, Diego Luna ended up securing it. More big names like Joel Edgerton, Dominic West, Mark Strong, Taylor Kitsch, Joel Kinnaman, Sam Worthington, and Gerard Butler circled the project. However, it's unsure what roles they would have been in the running for. By the summer of 2015, the rest of the cast was filled in with the likes of Mads Mikkelsen, Ben Mendelsohn, Riz Ahmed, Forrest Whitaker, and Alan Tudyk, just to name a few. Additionally, we also had several actors reprise their roles, such as James Earl Jones as Darth Vader, and Genevieve O'Reilly as young Mon Mothma, who played the character in Revenge of the Sith, but ended up getting cut out of that movie. Principal photography was scheduled to take place on August 8th of 2015, and by all accounts, everything was looking up, and there was no big hiccups in the production. This would change once cameras actually began rolling. Filming for Rogue One took place all over the world. These locations included Iceland, the Maldives, Jordan, and England. This location shooting resulted in the film looking beautiful, but at the same time it made the budget skyrocket to an extremely high number, with an early report pointing towards $200 million. But this number would only go up drastically as more work was done. In February of 2016, Bob Iger stated that Rogue One was, quote, virtually completed and we absolutely love what we've seen so far. However, reports surfaced later in May which pointed that Disney was not happy with the film they were seeing, and the several weeks of reshoots planned for June of 2016 told a different story. In all fairness, these reshoots were built into the schedule before a single frame was shot, and were to be expected. Although these reshoots were originally scheduled for spring, but were bumped to midsummer to allow for extra time for the creative team to decide what they wanted to alter. And this is when Tony Gilroy entered the picture. In June of 2016, Disney brought on this two-time Oscar-nominated filmmaker to help rewrite the script and add in new scenes. In fact, he was even invited onto set for these reshoots to be the second unit director. working alongside Gareth Edwards. And this wasn't the first time these two creatives worked together, as Gilroy did similar rewrites on 2014's Godzilla to strengthen the story before the release. And this is where the story gets a bit fuzzy, as there's conflicting reports on how much on-set directing Gilroy had a hand in. Some people say that Edwards was basically benched for these reshoots and Gilroy was a ghost director, but others say these rumors were blown out of proportion. Edwards himself said this in an interview in 2023. The stuff that's out there on the internet about what happened on the film, there is so much inaccuracy about the whole thing. Tony came in and he did a lot of great work for sure, no doubt about it. But we all worked together until the last minute of that movie. Either way, the film before and after Gilroy entered the picture are two wildly different versions. Gilroy added more scenes that fleshed out characters such as Andor and Bodhi Rook, focused more on the theme of sacrifice, and the entire ending of the film was drastically reshot and reworked. Krennic himself, Ben Mendelsohn, stated that these two versions of the film were enormously different and guessed that 20 to 30 scenes were changed. And these differences are evident if you watch the early trailers, as there are many shots in these trailers that are not included in the final film. What's interesting is the very last thing they filmed during these reshoots is widely regarded as the best scene in the film, that being Darth Vader's hallway scene. As a whole, I think these reshoots saved this film from being a total disaster, but at the same time, I would love to see what the first version looked like. But whether or not we will actually see this footage one day, I'm unsure. For his contributions to the script in the 5 weeks of reshoots, Tony Gilroy was paid $5 million. By the end of production, the budget was estimated to be around $280 million. However, with the UK film production tax breaks, it went down to $232 million. And when adjusted for inflation, that makes Rogue One the 41st most expensive movie of all time. So the pressure was on for this film to perform well. Rogue One, A Star Wars Story hit theaters on December 16th of 2016, with an opening weekend gross of $155 million. It debuted at number 1 in the box office, where it remained for 3 more weekends until it was usurped by Hidden Figures. In the US, it made a total of $532 million, and overseas, it made $523 million, for a total worldwide gross of just over $1 billion. So that means it was a certified box office success, and Deadline Hollywood calculated the film's net profit at around $319 million. This movie had a lot of things going for it. It was the first movie to come out after The Force Awakens, so there was still a lot of hope within the fandom, before The Last Jedi, Solo, and The Rise of Skywalker would ruin it. Additionally, it also got pretty good reviews. Rogue One currently holds an 84% critic and an 87% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, in addition to a 7.8 out of 10 on IMDb, a 65% score on Metacritic, and a 3.8 out of 5 on Letterboxd. The film was also nominated for 2 Oscars, those being for Best Visual Effects and Best Sound Mixing. Honestly, for how much went wrong behind the scenes and how much got reshot, it's a miracle this movie is good at all. I know its quality is subjective and there may be people who hate this movie, but as a whole, it had a pretty solid response and legacy. Rogue One is also one of those rare projects that not only expands lore in an interesting way, but makes other films better. This movie explains why there's a hole in the Death Star that will blow up everything if something is shot down there, which is a plot convenience that many people have an issue with in the original Star Wars. And Rogue One does this in a way where it doesn't seem unnatural, like it's over-explaining things or like it's trying to cash in on nostalgia bait. For example, you compare this to a moment in Solo where they show how Han got his last name, which feels so out of place and unnecessary. In all fairness, there's still nostalgia bait in Rogue One, but it's not nearly as eye-rolling as it could have been. It's odd how many comparisons that can be drawn between these two Star Wars spin-off movies. They both had one director who was either fired or sidelined, and then another director that was brought in for extensive reshoots. But one film succeeded commercially and critically, while the other didn't. One thing Rogue One had going for it compared to Solo is that it was telling the story of completely new characters. Han Solo is one of the most beloved characters in all of Star Wars. There was a lot of pressure on that film with every little decision being judged. But with Rogue One, they had more freedom to tell the story they wanted, and even the freedom to kill all these characters. Additionally, Han Solo already goes on a whole character arc in the original trilogy, so putting him through another one in a prequel movie was redundant. However, in my opinion, the most important impact that Rogue One has had is that it spawned Andor. In case you've been living under a rock, Andor is a Disney Plus series that follows Cassian Andor's journey to the rebellion before the events of Rogue One. It has 2 seasons and has had pretty widespread acclaim across most of the fandom, and even people outside the fandom. Andor is, in my opinion, the greatest Star Wars media of all time. I understand this is a divisive statement, but that's just how I feel. It's crazy that when you get talented creatives and give them space, time, and money, they will create a quality product. Who would have thought? It's also pretty funny that Rogue One was the only Disney feature film that spawned a spin-off. Like, we were supposed to get a Lando series after Solo came out, but that fizzled out, and we haven't had much media following the events of the sequel trilogy. Out of all the Disney Star Wars films, I feel as though Rogue One has aged the best. There's the sequel films, which have aged like milk, and Solo, which is pretty forgotten, but Rogue One has only gotten better with time. This is of course due to Andor, which has given more context and weight to the characters in the film. And it's also due to the fact that most of the Disney Star Wars output has been pretty bad. So Rogue One looks great in comparison simply because it's a competent movie. The only major blemish on this film's legacy was the decision to include Grand Moff Tarkin by digitally resurrecting Peter Cushing. Even though Disney got permission from his estate and family, this still does not feel right. Every time I rewatch this film, I always cringe at these scenes, and I think it was a very bad decision on the filmmaker's part. But as a whole, I really like this movie, and I found that this is the Star Wars film I'd revisit the most. The first half is certainly a mess, as the editing and story is sporadic, but the final act is some of the best stuff we've ever seen in Star Wars. Absolutely phenomenal ending with some great action. But that's just my thoughts on Rogue One. Do you like the film? Do you hate it? What do you think is the best piece of Star Wars media? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. This has been Tom from Isenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week. And here's a sneak peek of next week's video. Although that moment when he gets hit off the train is ridiculous. Bro should have been toast after that. But this is the same universe with the fridge nuke, so I guess I shouldn't complain about stuff like this.